Order. This is the time and the place for the Marshalltown Community School District February 5th regular board meeting. We are having some technical difficulties. We're going to go ahead and forge on, but they're going to continue trying to correct the situation. So when they come out and crawl under the table, we'll pretend we don't see them, okay? Oh, look at there. Maybe we're already there. Look at that, just in time. You ask, what you get? Yeah, I guess. Wow. Hooray for you. Okay. Welcome to all of those of you who are with us and to the individuals who will be observing us on delayed broadcast. Allow me to do some introductions of the Board of Directors at the table with me. From the right, we have Sean Heitman, Karina Hernandez, Ross Harris. From the left, we have Mike Miller, Ben Fletcher, and Janelle Carter. At the center table to my right is Brian Bartz, the Board Secretary, and to my left is Dr. Theron Schutte, the Superintendent of Schools, and I'm Bea Niblack. We have a sheet on the speakers table for you if you're wishing to speak to an agenda item or to speak during public comments. You'll be allowed 5 minutes to speak during public comments, and according to board policy, the Board of Directors will not be able to reply or respond to your comments. We thank you for them anyway. Would you please read with me the mission for the Marshalltown Community School District? We develop learners who have the knowledge, skills, and positive mindset to successfully pursue a meaningful future
through personalized learning experiences.
And stand as you're able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any additions or changes to the board agenda?
Yes, we have 3 changes. One is from the consent agenda, we are pulling the EAP agreement with an anticipation of coming back at the next board meeting. Secondly, in the recognitions, the class of 1977 donations going to be postponed till the next meeting. And thirdly, 4.02, the thesis proposal approval will also be pushed to the next meeting due to the weather.
I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Miller Carter, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0. Mr. Potter?
Okay, we originally had some school counselors that planned to be here, but due to the weather, they couldn't make it. So we just want to read the proclamation for National School Counseling Week. I don't know.
Karina is going to do that.
Okay.
Proclamation National School Counseling Week. Whereas school counselors are employed in public and private schools to help students reach their full potential, and whereas school counselors are actively committed to helping students explore their abilities, strengths, interests, and talents as these traits relate to career awareness and development. And whereas school counselors help parents focus on ways to further the educational, personal, and social growth of their children, and whereas school counselors work with teachers and other educators to help students explore their potential and set realistic goals for themselves. And whereas school counselors seek to identify and utilize community resources that can enhance and complement comprehensive school counseling programs and help students become productive members of society. And whereas comprehensive developmental school counseling programs are considered an integral part of the educational process that enables all students to achieve success in school. Therefore, I, Karina Hernandez, do hereby proclaim February 5th to the 9th, 2018 as National School Counseling Week.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we don't have our counselors here to thank for their services. Oh, we do have one. Thank you. You can spread the word to your peers. Moving on to the consent agenda, we have the minutes of January 16th and the minutes from the January 22nd work session. Are there any additions or corrections?
There are none.
Items of note for personnel, Mr. Spargettis.
All right. 3 retirements. First one is Sharon Bachman. She is the secretary for the curriculum department here at Central Office. She has been with the district for 28 years. And previous to her 5 years in the curriculum department, she worked with the Caring Connection program at Marshalltown High School and was the secretary for the technology department. Sharon is looking forward to spending more time with her grandkids in retirement. Judy Brittain has spent all 25 of her years with the district in the business office. She started as an accounts receivable clerk for 3 years and then spent 13 years as the accounts payable clerk before moving on to the role of business office manager, which she has been in for 9 years. Cheryl Dunham has 26 years of service to the district in various roles. She started as a paraprofessional at Fisher before becoming a bilingual tutor, also at Fisher. In 2004, Cheryl was a long-term sub at Woodbury before becoming a full-time ELL and bilingual teacher at Rogers, where she has been since 2005. So with those 3, that is 79 total years of service to our district.
We're losing some expertise. It will be hard to replace. Thank you very much. You've already been apprised of the interagency agreements and contracts and the contract withdrawn. Looking at open enrollments, we have a few in and a few out. Looking at the donations, we have a donation from the graduating class of 77.
Yeah, that was
That
the
will
one.
be coming at a subsequent meeting.
Right.
The Bobcat Booster Club has presented a donation, 15,000 plus to the high school athletic department. And we have a parent who is donating an easy stander to the special ed department. I have a picture of one there for your own knowledge. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Second.
Harris Miller, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0. Any names?
No.
Dr. Jurgensen, would you and your people come forward and share with us?
This evening, we are going to bring a very short but timely presentation from Rogers School. And we are going to try to honor the time frame very closely that Dr. Schutte put out before us. We have shared with the board our attendance center plan for this year, very similar to other attendance center plans throughout the district. You'll see reading, math, attendance. But you might have noticed in one section something that's a little unique. And one of the things that's unique about Rogers School is that we have, over time, been able to work on a school climate that is very responsive to students' needs. And we have put together some things based on science. Now, did we always know that it was based on science? No. Years ago, it just made perfect sense and it tended to work. Karina was there some of those years. But later on, we learned that science was very much on our side of working on a school climate that helps all students be successful. And so you probably saw part of the action plan that had to do with working in the area of building student resilience. And student resilience is related to different types of sciences right now, and our media specialist, Mrs. Face, is kind of pinch hitting partially tonight for our instructional strategist who couldn't be here, but she's going to explain a little bit some of our recent work. 3 years ago, in cooperation with Micah, we brought a national expert to Rogers, Christopher J. Blodgett, and he's with Washington State University. And we brought him into our building and through the district and shared with Des Moines Public Schools, actually. And at that time, it was new learning for us. But at this point, what you're going to hear from Mrs. Face is learning that has caught on from within our building, within our staff, and we're taking things to the next level. So, Mrs. Face, would you kind of elaborate on part of our attendance center plan?
One of the areas that we chose to focus on this year was to implement strategies around building resiliency and a high sense of safety with our students. And we did that by doing a study group on fostering resilient learners, strategies for creating a trauma-sensitive classroom, written by Kristen Sowers and Pete Hall. And their definition of resilience is the capacity to acknowledge and attend to personal difficulties while still working towards expectations. So throughout the study, it strengthened our learning about children who experience chronic stress and those that are impacted by trauma, and how we can create a building climate and a culture that is responsive to all student needs, including those that have had an adverse life experiences. We learned the importance of constructing trusting and safe relationships, not only with our students, but with each other. How to build a universal school climate that believes in the success of all of our students, and how to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of the kids. Routines, common student expectations, consistent schedules, music for transitions instead of bells, opportunities for students to practice sharing fun ways for students to experience self-control at high levels, and reassuring students while practicing safety drills so they're not startled or afraid are just a few examples of what we've already put in place to provide predictability and to reassure that safety in our students. We also practice aspects of instructional discipline through holding students accountable with consequences, but more importantly, emphasizing the teaching of successful behaviors. Misbehavior is viewed as an opportunity to teach our behavioral curriculum, which begins with our Rogers Pledge, the common area expectations, and social skills. Some of the new ideas that we're going to be implementing to continue strengthening students' feelings of safety are to be sharing photos of people that will be visitors in our building, as well as making sure that we formally introduce any visitors that come into our building so everybody's aware of who they are. Implementing the use of calming corners in classrooms so students have a safe place where they can work through different feelings that they have. Posting common vocabulary regarding safe ways to respond to situations. An example of this would be staying in their upstairs brain, which is the safe part of the brain, and versus being in your downstairs brain, which is kind of the fight or flight area of the brain. And so we're working on teaching that to the students and then having common visuals with that. And then creating student safety questionnaires so that we can find out how safe students are feeling at school right now. Our staff strive to stay personally regulated, maintain positive feelings toward disruptive students, and exhibit grace while helping our students to overcome their adverse childhood experiences. We feel strongly that understanding chronic stress, the need for safety, and building strong relationships are the keys to creating the foundation for students to be able to learn at an accelerated rate.
Mr. Church is going to explain one of the strategies we've used for some time, but we just rebooted that strategy this year with some additional pieces. It's called the morning gathering, so you need the microphone.
Oh, I think so.
Oh, okay.
I think
We're going
our,
to demonstrate the
we're
morning
going to
gathering.
demonstrate the morning gathering for you, and then I'm going to add, so you'll understand how we kind of develop that throughout the upper grades too as well.
And we have some beautiful kindergarten students here to demonstrate. We encourage you, the board, to join in with our morning gathering that we're recreating here.
Okay, my name is Megan Cartwright, and this is my teaching partner, Judy Brittain, and we teach kindergarten at Rogers. And this is just an example of how we do our opening or our gathering in the morning. So kindergartners, can you show me on your hand how you're feeling? 5 is high, and 1 is low. How are you feeling right now?
And my question is, thumbs up, thumbs up, how you feeling? I'm kind of like right here. Yeah, me too.
Feeling like a 4? Good. And then after that, we go into our pledges.
This is our Rogers pledge, March 1.
Just have a couple.
Yeah. Rogers pledge, and then we have our motto, and then we're going to. Here we go. As a member of the Rogers School family, I will be responsible, I will cooperate, I will be respectful, I will do my best. We are here to learn. I will be responsible, I will cooperate, I will be respectful, I will do my best. We are here to learn at Rogers School. The school is good for you and me. Be kind, be safe, be happy. We are awesome. Woo! Here we go. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just sit right here, honey. Just sit right down here.
After we do our pledges, we go into reading a story in the morning. This one happens to be about kindness. We have books about being respectful, being responsible. So I'm just going to pick one short little story from here. It says, show kindness to a friend who gets hurt. Janice and Tammy were skipping with Hannah. Janice and Hannah were turning the rope and singing skipping songs while Tammy jumped. Faster, faster, cried Tammy while she showed off her quick moves, hopping from one foot to the other. Suddenly she tripped and fell. Hannah and Janice quickly dropped the rope and went to help her up. Tammy wasn't hurt badly, but she felt embarrassed that she had fallen. She started to sob. Hannah, she said, there, Tommy, don't cry. Tammy, don't cry, anyone can fall. Janice put her arm around Tammy, and soon Tammy stopped crying. At the bottom it says, a kind word or a hug can make a friend feel better after a fall. If an injury looks serious, call an adult. And after we read our story, we go into doing our melt. And so the kids are sitting on the floor, and we put our legs out in front. Cross our arms. Roll our shoulders. Roll your shoulders. Let's do it really. Roll them forward. Okay, let's breathe in. Blow out. Breathe in. Forward and ready. Okay, let's go to the milk. Got to cross over. Roll up and under. Good job.
And they close their eyes and we talk about something might be happening today, or visualize kindness in your brain, or how you can help a friend. Then we just sit here very quietly for a few seconds.
And in the end, and in my classroom, we do breathe in with the good stuff, blow all the bad stuff out, and in with the happy stuff, blow all the sad stuff out, in with the nice stuff, blow all the mean stuff out, and one more for good luck, that, we open our eyes, wiggle our fingers, shake it out, and then we're ready for our day.
Thank you, kindergarten. One of the things I want everyone to be aware of is this takes a team effort, and we have really worked as a team to develop this. And as the kids go through the grades, other things are added. For example, some of the older graded kids from first, second, third on do a rating system of 1 to 5 in the scale, and so the teacher will ask them, how are you feeling today? And they can hold up their hand, or they can say between 1 and 5, and then they'll ask them, do you want to tell why? And some of them will say yes, some won't. But what it does is it gives the teacher the option of knowing maybe this student might need a little extra push that day, or they're really doing well that day, and she can congratulate them more. Each classroom has come up with one. We all do the pledge, but a lot of them have a district mission, the mission statement turned into their own words for their classroom. It's based on that. And then they have a student recognition, which is the stars that we give to students for good behavior. They take those stars and they recognize the students and tell them, like when they got it, maybe they got it in PE, or maybe they got it in art or media class, then they share that and congratulate them. And during the day, teachers will add components such as social skill instruction when needed, and brain breaks, and other student recognitions as they're needed throughout the day. And I know a lot of teachers, when the kids come in from recess, if they're kind of agitated or up a little bit, they'll do the melt again, just to help bring them back down, because the melt is a relaxation to help kids get focused and ready to learn. So we found just kind of through trial and error and through ART, which is the aggressive replacement training, we found some things that we can add components to our gathering, and it's really helped us.
You might recognize some of the science that we're applying from the book study, the current book study. I've had a chance to read both first and second chapters, and it is very applicable to our presentation tonight, directly applicable. We know that if children aren't ready to learn, if their mind is not in the proper place or state, that all of our quality instruction, or much of our quality instruction, will not be learned. And we also know that children who may appear to struggle with learning may actually have some other, background type issues. That this type of beginning of the day helps us to get their full attention and to provide them with as quality of education as we can provide. So as you heard many times, the word safety comes up. None of us understand a child's perception of safety. None of us can put our perception of safety over theirs and say, I've got it, I understand that. So what we really are trying to work for is at all times, in all ways, safety is in place. Many of our children check their environment for safety many times per second. And so what we're trying to do is help minimize that so they're paying attention to instruction so that they can learn and learn at an accelerated rate. So that's our presentation tonight. It gives the board a chance to ask some questions while we have Mr. Church here especially, and Mrs. Face, and two of our classroom teachers who did a great job with some of our kids tonight. So,
Questions?
I want to comment that, Dr. Jurgensen and Rogers were one of the first, along with Miss Williams at Hoagland, who's in the back, to voluntarily entertain bringing the Junior Achievement Program into the district. And when we had our training sessions, we had planned to take individual pictures of the volunteers for future purposes, and Dr. Jurgensen had a great idea, which was to create a collage of those pictures, which I think resonated really well with our school community, to put that out there. And then additionally, as was said, sharing those pictures, our intent was to share those pictures with the teachers who they'd be partnered with, but hadn't even thought about what you brought up today. And shortly after we did that, about sharing the pictures with the students as well to make them as comfortable as possible when these new faces come in. And I think it's going to be a great way to meaningfully engage our school community, and part of the intent is to hopefully build another positive adult relationship with the students that they come into contact with. So kudos for helping us with that vision.
Have you found a need, or I'm thinking of the communication with the parents on what they're doing, so that when the kindergartner comes home and they're talking about how they got to sit today and the songs they do you share it at the parent conferences, or how do you broaden it?
We share some of that information at our Family Learning Center each year. We also do have those conversations with parents. We've been doing some of these things for quite a while now, so we're almost ready to enter a second generation on some of the strategies that we've been using. But again, until information like this starts putting all the pieces together, one may notice that things tend to work without having the science of why. And we are in the process of preparing to bring back a national level trainer to our building in the area of instructional discipline. That's something we did 21 years ago in our building. And this trainer is planning to return. Her name is Tricia Wells. And Ms. Wells is an expert in instructional discipline. You know, and it all began years back that she worked in inner city schools and tended to put together some strategies and some approaches that seemed to always work if people implemented them. And so we have held on to many of those pieces, but we have a whole group of our staff who don't know this trainer now. It's time to retrain and reboot like we did with our morning gathering. So in March and April, we will have that trainer there, and it will focus on our strengths. We are educators. We are teachers. If you have a student that doesn't know how to read, you teach. If you have a student that doesn't know how to do math, you teach. If you have a student that doesn't know the right social skills or know your expectations, what do we do sometimes? We tend to have consequences before we teach. And so Ms. Wells is going to be working with our staff to reignite some of that work that we did years ago to have a teaching mindset around helping our students be successful. And it's a very powerful training. It's very much in alignment with what you're reading in this book. In fact, I can show you the exact sections that align with this. I've got them all marked. So we are pulling together the science of hope around, you'll hear it frequently, trauma-informed care, but it's really more than that. It's about creating an environment where kids are not concerned and thinking about their safety every second. And the kids receive instruction they need to know how to be acceptable socially and successful academically. Those things go hand in hand. They do not happen independently.
Thank you for sharing and providing us a link with our book study.
Yeah, nice segue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Niehaus, Mr. Judge.
Good evening. How are you? So we're here to ask your permission to take some kids to Kansas City to see several art museums, March 2nd of this year. So it's coming up quickly on us. We're gonna go down and see, they have the Nelson Adkins Art Museum down in Chicago, in Kansas City, get the right city here. They have a show on Picasso, through Picasso's eyes. It's about his work and the works that influenced him. So we do a unit in our Art 1 classes that deal with Picasso. So we want to take kids so they can actually see some of that, and hopefully we can expand what we do there in that unit as well. So we're going to go, as you can see the itinerary up there, we're going to take off in the morning and leave early and get down there as soon as we can and see a lot of different things, and hopefully be back by 11 or 12, something like that. The cost we had up there is $80. We weren't quite sure. Since you the itinerary, our cost is actually going to be $65. So we've been able to lower that in things that way. We've got a couple of kids that have helped us raise money in the past on our fundraising events that paid for their trip already that way. And so far we have not had anybody that's come up and said that they want to go, but they don't have the finances to do it. So if we have somebody that way, we always take them with us no matter what. So we have room for any of you that want to go with us too.
How many students do you anticipate going?
Right at the moment, we just have 18 signed up, but our goal is we can have room for probably 46 kids. So we've got things in line to take whatever we can do. So, but we are sticking to our guns. We're going to go, no matter how many we have. So we may have lots of room for lots more to go, but we're I think some of them were waiting until after tonight. And we were making sure that we had your approval before they wanted to jump on board. So.
And that's a Friday conference day, right?
It is a Friday of conference day, yeah. One of the things I've learned is that by going during the week, that saves us over $600 on the buses. It's one of the things we were hoping that because it was a Friday when kids would normally be in school, that they may not be off at their jobs. So that may give them the opportunity to go where they may not be able to go on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Questions?
Move for approval.
Pardon me?
Move for approval.
Do I hear a second?
Okay.
Fletcher, Hernandez, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I have one more request. Our school district art show is coming up. We're opening on February 24th at the Fisher Community Center. We're hoping to see a lot of you there, but I need 2 judges for the show. And so that judging goes on Friday night before the show, and that would be the 23rd of February at the Fisher Community Center. I think we started, so 4 or 4:30 we start judging. I think it's 4:30. But I will send out an email later asking if you're interested, respond and let me know.
Okay.
But that is coming. Thought I'd give you a heads up. Let you fight over it and see who wants to.
What
Janelle
time
and I
frame?
did it
4:30 to?
Yeah, we did it a couple years ago.
I think we have until 7 or 7:30 at the center.
But I think usually within an hour or so is usually about the time that it takes to kind of figure out which
Yeah.
selections you want for.
It's the 24th or 23rd?
23rd.
The 23rd is, that's
The
Friday.
art show itself is the 24th.
On that Saturday.
And that's Saturday, yeah. I think I have the right dates. Yeah.
I think so.
And that's how things are selected that go around central office and hang in the hallways.
Yeah, the work you see in here and in the halls are selected from last year's show. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Stevenson.
Good evening. On January 15th, I was here in front of you presenting information about some goals and outcomes we had related to moving some of our young Bobcats forward. And I shared a couple strategies and actions that we plan to take in the near future to accomplish those goals. And we're back here 2 weeks later. And at this point, I'm asking, recommending action for the board to approve a change in our programming from 4 half-days to 5 half-days per week. And the increase in that programming does have a cost along with it, which is shared with you and was shared with you in board docs. That's an estimate, and the cost will be funded through reserves that we have in our statewide voluntary preschool program.
Questions?
I guess that was my only question, is I don't, when you say reserves in the program, what does that mean?
We have a carryover balance annually because we have not spent down our statewide funding from year to year in prior years.
Is that we have a current pool of money, or that's how much room we have in the annual budget?
We have much more available in the budget than
Okay.
that 19,000, yes.
And it's good to have a carryover because as you expand the program, the dollars are a year behind, so.
Correct. We've talked about possibly adding a 9th teacher if we can find a classroom. That's our challenge at this point, if our numbers would support that, and then we could find a location.
Other questions?
I would say I appreciate the update that was sent out this week, noting all the concerns from the previous meeting and the fact that they've been addressed.
Yeah.
Has that feedback been provided to the staff as well?
The responses to their concerns?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I think more than anything, I'm looking forward to see what happens this year with the data, because there's been slight changes over the last year and now this year. So constant evaluation of what we're doing to make it better is great.
Yeah, they've made great progress. We're hopeful that that will continue.
And I think, again, connected with what we've been reading in the book, for students of poverty, these years, preschool through early childhood, are just extraordinarily important in terms of helping our kids be in a better position for success going forward.
I didn't know Mick was going to bring his book up here, but that was something I had thought about too, and having read, this is chapter 2, which we're not talking about, but that high level of importance that's put on having secure attachments and stable environments for students, and that starts as young as 4. We saw it here with our kinders tonight.
Guess it all dovetails, doesn't it?
Yeah,
For
exactly.
once. Any other questions or comments from the board? Pardon me? There's nobody listed on the sheet. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Is that to approve the preschool program as presented?
Program as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Was that Ben? Motion has been made by Harris Fletcher. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. The motion carries 7-0. Thank you. You and Andrew.
School calendar.
All right, you can see the results from the survey, the previous one that was done for staff, and the reboot for the parents survey. And the parents slightly favored not having a full week of spring break. And then we kind of totaled up both the staff and the parent survey at the bottom there. And it's slightly in favor of having a full week of spring break next year. So we're presenting this calendar of a full week of spring break for next year.
Yeah, just to revisit, we conducted 2 surveys. One was on the professional development component and what preferences were of employees and/or parents. And then the second survey had to do with spring break. As we've shared with you and as is illustrated, our employees tended to favor a continuation of spring break with a simple majority. Parents tended to favor not having spring break. by a little bit smaller, simple majority. And then when we look at it combined, you can see the differences there, which it's pretty split. So the proposal, because the combined totals landed on retaining spring break, would be to approve this calendar, which includes spring break for next year, with the idea of looking at alternating years potentially and trying to meet in the middle with everybody's needs. Of course, we can revisit that next year. But the other caveat is that there's been a recent bill submitted because of where the 23rd of August, the first official start date falls, which is on a Thursday, and the state fair ends the preceding weekend. There's a bill in the legislature to consider changing the language to reflect the Monday following the state fair or the 23rd, whichever comes first. So in the event that that legislation becomes law, that bill becomes law, what we would plan to do would be to back up the calendar for that Tuesday, the 21st, being the first start date, providing Monday as a staff day, and that's typically a favorable day for buildings to do the unpack your backpack and open house or what have. So that would kind of be the plan. We would bring the calendar, of course, back to you to reapprove it, but our plan would be to back up a couple days in conjunction with that legislation if that happens.
Is the motion that you'll ask from us tonight just
to approve next year's calendar?
Just to approve next year's calendar?
Yep.
Not the idea of going back and forth year after year?
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions?
I do note that this calendar doesn't have the commencement day on it, but the one for this year does. So.
Yeah, the reason for that is because if this held, we would likely, if we're not able to move the calendar back 2 days, if we move the calendar back 2 days, we will be okay having commencement on Memorial Weekend as it has occurred in the recent past. With this calendar, we would not be able to do that because seniors would have more than 5 days off, and legally we can only calendar them 5 days off, so we would have to find a different evening or time to do the commencement. And we hadn't settled on when that would be with the high school yet, and we may want to do some surveying, give a couple different options to parents, to-be senior parents next year before we make that determination.
Don't want to set that in stone and then have that be changed with the legislature. As people plan ahead for graduation, we want to kind of make sure we have that right first before we officially approve the graduation date, so.
Good catch, though.
Yeah.
If
It's a graduating senior. Why don't we have a graduating senior next year?
Somebody told you.
Oh, I love
So I'm fine.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
You're welcome.
I'm fine with approving this tonight, but is there any thought to just hold off until the legislature decides what they're doing?
I don't think that there'd be any value in holding off any further, because again, we're just going to back everything up 2 days if that happens.
Do you have any idea when they're going to decide?
No. I would like to believe that it should be.
I have an idea about anything.
I mean, it's a rhetorical question.
I would like to believe that it's kind of a no-brainer, because the real intent of that law was to protect the state fair and have people's availability, so students particularly. So I would like to believe it'll go through, but who knows? Doesn't cost anything. So.
Yeah.
I would move for approval of the calendar as presented.
Second.
For 2018-19.
Yes.
May I hear a second?
Second.
Wow, I mean, that was just,
Second.
thank you for using the microphone. Fletcher, Miller, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. The motion carries 7-0. Thank you. We'll We'll be at this forever. Oh. It's time. Get out those books.
Tournament.
You're in charge.
I am. Well, we can take a look at chapter 1 here. I'll invite also if any of the district or remaining building administrators want to interject, they're welcome to as well.
One.
We've got 2 administrators in the.
Well, we've got one who's participating in the book study, right? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we provide.
Would you two like to come up to the speaker's table and join us? Sure.
No choice.
So the first question that we outlined for consideration is looking at Jensen's definition of poverty and how that compares with versions that we've either seen or heard within our own district.
His definition starts at the bottom of page 5.
I would just say, I'll just open up the conversation, I guess. Generally, I think in the school arena, we oftentimes associate poverty with free and reduced lunch qualifications. And sometimes that does or doesn't meet, I guess, the full conditions that Jensen puts in the definition there. And it doesn't take into account certainly the different types of poverty that exist, which he outlines.
Can we echo in from back here too?
Yep.
Okay. I was at the top of page 6. I thought that was interesting that they pointed out the point about it's relative to where you live. So, you might actually have a job where you make $40,000 or $50,000, but if you're living in downtown Chicago, that's not going to go very far. You're not going to be able to meet your basic needs, and you're going to have to make different choices. Whereas, in maybe a different place in Iowa, $40,000 to $50,000 would go a long way. So I think that's kind of something we have to keep in mind, not just from this side of it, but from the other side too, because a lot of what I've seen since I've been in Marshalltown is that for a lot of our families that live in poverty, it's not the same level of poverty that they might have experienced in their own country or the place that they resettled from, because they're living in a place that has opportunity to get out of poverty, so it feels more, maybe it doesn't feel as
Destitute.
right, exactly, because there's opportunities to move up within the system or to get out of poverty, whereas in the areas where they lived that were unsafe or going through civil unrest or whatever it may be, they didn't have those opportunities.
Let me just throw in, to give you a figure, you just happened to throw out 40,000 in your discussion. And the Department of Human Services in 2017, everything always lags a year when you're working with poverty data. The poverty threshold for a family of 4 was 24,600.
That's here in Iowa or here in Marshalltown?
That is in the nation. That's what the National Department of Human Services, whatever, considers, and that would be what we would use for free and reduced lunches as well. So if a family of four made less than $24,600, they would receive free lunches. And a whole bunch of other services as well. So if you look at our free and reduced lunch figures,
Which is more than half our population?
yeah, closer to three quarters. We know that their families fall below this threshold of 24,600 for a family of four.
Or some multiplier of that for reduced? How far?
Reduced is 130%, I think.
So not, yeah.
I have
Not a big multiplier.
I have some long-term history on that in the district. Years ago, not too many years ago, I would keep close tabs on those figures, and the overwhelming number of students who were free or reduced were free. We had a very small population of reduced, and I would assume that's probably still in play. I noticed under the last two, the urban and rural, I also have some experience with that too. As part of our All-America City status and working with the national campaign that year, Marshalltown's really kind of a tweener type community. Even though we're considered rural, we have some aspects that actually make us look more urban. For example, the housing in the Rogers area is very densely populated versus some of the other areas. And so some of those, the urban and rural isn't necessarily a real perfect type when it comes to Marshalltown, because we tend to have elements of both.
Well, just to, I guess, show how I think, this reality resonates with decisions sometimes that we make. Today's weather decision was a perfect example of that. There were a lot of districts that we're looking at and did cut out before lunch today, like at 11:15 or what have, and obviously safety always is a number one in terms of how those decisions are made, but we also think about things like, is it possible to still be safe and to get kids lunch before we cut them out, which was where things fell today, because the reality was the weather conditions weren't any different at 11:15 than they were at 12:15 than they were at 1:15, and the only way they were going to get any better was to wait till 4 o'clock probably. So, that played heavily into my decision to go at 1:30 with a 2-hour early out or 1:20 versus do what everybody else was doing. And, and we talk about those things, and obviously the surrounding districts have maybe different realities than we do, but that weighs heavily and has in a couple different districts that I've worked in, some of our decision making.
So as Dr. Jorgensen mentioned rural poverty versus urban, et cetera, as you look down through those 6 types of poverty, where does Marshalltown sit? What do you know about poverty in our area, and is it generational, is it situational?
It seemed to me that the urban and rural, there are some pieces of each, and then I imagine there's a lot of relative and maybe some generational, right? It's a mixed bag. I imagine when you've got a migrant population, it's hard to say it's generational if it's migrant. I imagine it's generational from where it's from. But it seems the relative, what stuck out to me is I think, and I'm sorry I didn't bring the book tonight, but don't have all of the standard of living that might be expected, or maybe that our community or culture is based around. So that makes me think about things like transportation, right? Folks can't afford, don't have as much access to transportation. Not a destitute situation, but certainly a poverty relative to maybe the expectations of the community.
I wondered with this too, when I read absolute, I wrote notes to myself, third world type of countries, but in some ways, I've seen just in my driving around that when you see houses sharing electricity, when you see cords stretched across yards, when you see, you know, people doubling or tripling the occupancy of an apartment, that makes me think, or the homeless population and what Marshalltown as a community has been able to do to help or not help the homeless in the community. You know, those, I don't think it would be unreasonable to say there are probably people who live in absolute poverty here. And it also could be, most of our refugees are secondary resettlement, but if you are here as a primary resettlement, you only get X number of days of assistance, and then you're on your own. And that assumes you can obtain a job, obtain housing, get a driver's license, those types of things to be able to function, and that works for some and not all. And so I would say that there is, we just were talking about a family recently, that people that are living in these circumstances right in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that Mick and Liz could probably speak about it better. I know in other districts that I've lived in, there was a lot of generational poverty in terms of, you know, no one from the family having gone on to get a post-secondary education, settling for what jobs they could qualify for, kind of losing hope or perspective that a better life or existence was accessible because of barriers, whether it was financial, whether it was lack of encouragement within the home, you know, because of despair or what have. And I would say, too, that although I'd agree that probably not too many families in Iowa, I would hope, live in absolute poverty. You know, I had a situation in one of my former districts where we would have said the same thing until we found out that a student was living in a home that had a dirt floor, did not have running water, and the only reason we knew was because there were some hygiene issues for which when we finally were able to find out what was going on, you know, the creek was frozen, so the student couldn't bathe. You know, so, I mean, that does happen in Iowa and, you know, in our country. I don't know to what degree, but, you know, to assume that nobody's in that situation probably would be a false assumption, I'm guessing. And a lot more situational where due to lack of finances or circumstances, electricity gets shut off or water gets shut off, and, you know, families don't have anywhere to go, so they're dealing with that on maybe more of a short-term basis. But, you know, you can imagine the kind of impact that would have, you know, on a student, and particularly a young student, which, you know, I think leads to why the types of things we saw Rogers presenting today are so critically important to help kids get in a better place and develop a relationship for which if the parent doesn't come forward asking for help, we can figure out, you know, who needs help and try to figure out how to help them.
We have, go ahead.
I work in the school and working at Micah. I've seen definitely situational, generational, absolute, and relative. We have a little bit of
Everything.
most of it here. And I guess I gotta say that absolute is really, it's really down on me when I worked at the county office and seen elderly in that situation. Sadly, I have also seen kids, you know, that came in, grabbed a food box, you know, because they didn't have any food and asked if they can come in a week. So I definitely think that they're out there, and sometimes we just don't see them because they're maybe not school aged yet, or they're out of school. But I think it's actually a reality here in Marshalltown that we kind of see.
We have had individuals living in cars and tents at Riverview Park. I don't know whether we have any now or not. I suppose we could drive by and see. But we do have those individuals who have nothing but the clothes on their back and the food that we give them at school.
In springtime, summertime, if you drive by behind the mall where the Yonkers parking lot is at, and that Woods area, you see tents in there. In the summer, spring, sometimes even fall. They're coming out to walk to Walmart or you see clothes hanging. So, yeah.
I would add, it's not uncommon for our buildings to support these families the best they can by letting the kids use our shower facilities or our laundry facilities because they haven't washed their clothes for days, or they don't have access to running water, so they're using whatever we can offer them to just try to keep their hygiene up.
Many cases, some of the families, if you follow their history, the number of addresses they've had in Marshalltown, it's not unheard of for a child to have up to about 10 addresses in Marshalltown by their second grade year. And so, living in motels, various addresses within the city, some of them real and some fictional along the way.
Yeah.
But it's more prevalent than one wants to think.
Well, and in addition, we know that in the recent past, we've had 25% of our students move out in a given year and another 25% move in, pretty much to replace them. So there's that constant churn as it relates to that. One of the things that was interesting, our largest employer, JBS, when I was there last year, they were talking about how they were raising their entry-level wages to $15 an hour, but they also conditioned that by saying for the first time it was at the same level it was back in the late 70s or early 80s, before the meatpacking plants kind of went under and then came back. So that's kind of telling as well in terms of, obviously the cost of living has gone up significantly since that time. And even though for the company it's kind of a threshold to get back to that, it's not necessarily speaking to, a wage for which someone can probably raise a family easily. So, in a lot of cases, both of our parents work there as well in similar circumstances.
In relationship to Lisa's comments about many people living in one house, I am familiar with a specific family that lives in a two-bedroom house with 18 people living in that facility. When I made a visit to the house, I chose not to sit just because of the unclean, bug-infested environment that these people were living in. The school did as much as possible to help, but that is a way of life.
Speaking of ways that school helps, we have great support from our community, like for mittens, gloves, coats, all those types of things. But in the examples where I've talked about how many addresses have kids had, when people tend to move, they can't necessarily take all those things with them. And so each time a family may move, some of those assets disappear or become so unclean they're abandoned along the way. And so it becomes kind of a cumulative effect of, if we receive some, at some point we're going to need to replace that. We're going to need to replace that because of instability in housing.
The third question talks about the 4 primary risk factors caused by poverty: emotional and social challenges, acute and chronic stressors, cognitive lags, and health and safety issues. And has that changed our perceptions of low SES students in our school? And obviously your presentation spoke a little bit about the importance of emotional and social in addition to academic. And physical probably could be thrown in there as well. And I really liked what you said about the importance of teaching, helping. Sometimes I think we assume that kids should know better, but they don't necessarily know better because maybe it hasn't been taught or hasn't been reinforced in their home environment or the parent simply needs help in reinforcing it with their child. But, you know, the comment that you made about teaching first and worrying about, and we're talking especially for elementary or early childhood, and then, I mean, it should be a teachable moment at every level, any level and every level, but at those levels particularly, and, you know, focusing on, as the book talks about, you know, how do you recondition the mindset in order to avoid going down the road of making poor choices and mistakes and that sort of thing.
As a district, we've spent some time trying to retool the mindset of some of our staff members about approaching families and especially students who don't always follow the rules. Helping them understand that kids will do well if they can, but they have barriers to do that. And so it's our job to help eliminate those barriers and teach those skills. Kind of based on the work that Rogers has done, and it dovetails well into this book, we've made a considerable investment in training people in the hybrid problem-solving model around trauma-informed care, just so they have the background knowledge on how to work with families who don't fit into the traditional mold that, you know, their training schools, training programs taught them how to work with. So
We are doing a 3-part professional development at Lenahan. This will be our second, coming up on Wednesday, about de-escalation and how you can escalate a situation or de-escalate a situation through a chronic stress and trauma lens. And so we will be continuing that work too, and that goes right along with what Mick is talking about and what Dr. Schuette's talking about and what Mr. Krettinger is talking about on how to support our faculty in being able to be responsive in an appropriate way instead of maybe a punitive way.
I think one positive thing that I connect to with question 3 is that Marshalltown has done a nice job of trying to dispel the perception that low SES means low expectations and low outcomes, and so it's been really encouraging to me to see the stories that Andrew broadcasts, when I go into schools and see, the kids who are getting chosen or picked to do certain things within the school are participating or coming to attend this event or attend that event, you just stop thinking about that as, they're low SES students, and it becomes more about, they're Bobcats, they're Marshalltown kids, they're whatever. And I think the only way that we can continue to grow that mindset is by thinking about, as a system, what policies or procedures we have in place that are unintentionally causing opportunity gaps for kids. Because I truly believe that if we start removing barriers when they're 3 and 4 years old, and then hold their hand, it's not one of those things you're going to help them out for a year or so, and then they're going to fly away on their own. Poverty is a chronic stressor for families. Very rarely do they, move out of it in any short amount of time. And so I think we as a system have to keep holding, our supports in place all the way through high school. And even into college, we've heard about how some of our kids struggle once they get to higher ed because they don't have parents that have experienced the system. So as little as it sounds, starting with busing them to preschool when they're 4 and helping them fill out their FAFSA when they're 18, that's the kind of policy system moves I think that we have to continue to ask ourselves reflective questions about and try to be responsive, listen to the families, listen to what they say they need help with, and make that a priority.
I think it's important for us to remember that these stressors are cumulative and that they're not just a one-time effect. If you look at the model on page 9, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Model, right above that, it talks about poor children often feel isolated and unloved, feelings that kick off a downward spiral of unhappy life events, including poor academic performance, behavioral problems, dropping out of school, and drug abuse. We could put decreasing college chances in there. There are all kinds of things. And then when you look at the table on page 10, 1.2, Again, you look at the cumulative effect that multiple multiple experiences have, and look at the result they have in the drop in educational performance and test performance. By the time you add multiple of those particular risk factors, you've got 80 to 100% drop in your test performance just from those things. So it's cumulative and not just something that, as Lisa said, you can help with it at one time and then forget about it and assume that it's going to take off. And early intervention is the big key. I think if you look at the next to the last paragraph on page 12, it talks about the early intervention, and talking about how poverty impacts preschool and early school years, and that those individuals experience lower rates of school completion.
Well, and one of our responses to this in part that I'm, super excited about is the board's decision and agreement to expand summer school across the district for our students that are most in need of that. I've never seen a formula better than, more time, more people, more money getting thrown at a problem in order to try to fix it than summer school or high quality summer school or before and after school programs. And Marshalltown had the opportunity, I think, a number of years ago to have the after school programming as well, and we're very interested and continue to try to pursue funds from outside of the district to try to hopefully bring that back again. But we saw as a district great success with Rogers having implemented that through Rogers University for a number of years as a pilot. So now trying to provide a similar but different opportunity to all students that does two things, that expands, hopefully it narrows some of the academic gap, at least in the extent of helping kids not lose any ground in the summer that they otherwise would by keeping them where they're at the end of the school year to the beginning of the school year. The other thing it does is provides an opportunity to provide them with some additional enriching opportunities or cultural opportunities within that summer school program, because most of these kids do not have anywhere close to the kinds of experiences that students of families that are not in poverty have through vacations or trips or exposure to other things in Iowa or the country or out of the country. And so it does provide on a smaller scale an opportunity to provide some of that enrichment, which is in many ways equally as important. So.
It's also, I've said it many times, that whole concept of the enrichment piece is so valuable for other reasons, also about vocabulary building. But most importantly, many students that we work with have kind of a glass ceiling effect, that some experiences in their life will never be attainable. Never get to ride a horse, never get to play golf, never get to have experiences because that's for other people. And those types of experiences give kids a can-do kind of mindset that is so valuable to taking off that glass ceiling. Then suddenly other things become possible. College becomes possible. Careers become possible to the kids that weren't possible before.
The last question that we had, which we've kind of delved into, are there other considerations that the district should make in order to reduce and or eliminate some of those challenges or barriers?
I was going to ask Lisa, because you said that about you thought maybe there were policy or procedural things that we had that could be barriers that we're not really thinking about. Did you have an example?
The top of my head.
Yeah, off the top of your head.
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is busing. And we have fixed that for our preschoolers, but I still worry about our K-12 at-risk kids who maybe live 2.1 miles away or 3.1 miles, so they're too far to qualify for busing. And in a middle class or higher family, they might have a support system or neighbors or coworkers or somebody they can carpool with and get their kids there. And for families that are community, migrants, whatever it may be, they don't have those networks in place. And they're, it's a day like today, if I want my 7-year-old walking 2.1 miles home or to school. So I think sometimes it's those, like access to transportation is the first thing that came to mind. And I don't know the easy answer to that, or the easy answer, but I think your address is an indicator of how you should get to school, but it's not the only thing that we need to take into consideration when we think about things. So.
5 to 6 blocks can be just as big a barrier as 2 miles in some cases, in some families.
Any parting comments from anyone?
I like what you're doing at Linehan with youth sports. I've seen that youth sports has become something that kids in poverty can't participate in. That youth sports is a travel league, expensive proposition that only certain people can do. And the fact that you've opened up intramurals at Linehan for everybody and the participation that seems to be getting is a real positive step. And I wonder if there's a way to push that down to the elementary school level for get some of the same benefits out of it. And I don't know, it doesn't sound like it would cost that much, and it might have some of the impacts maybe that you were talking about. I know, sports is maybe insignificant compared to some of the things you're talking about, but
Well, and our vision hopefully is for that to continue to expand into things even else, not just necessarily sports exclusive, although for many of our kids that might be their first exposure to a semi-organized opportunity to participate, as you said, Mike, but I think coding, there's a girls club for
Girls
coding
Who
that's
Code.
starting up.
It just started.
And really the sky is the limit. If there's interest on behalf of the students, significant interest, we want to try to figure out how to feed that interest and that passion through a vehicle to do it. Sometimes transportation, can be a barrier there too. And we've talked about, if we find the need, that maybe providing an activity bus or something like that would be looked at. I would definitely be in favor of, assuming that we can continue to build and get this off the ground at Linehan, taking a look at the elementaries in the sense of, maybe the upper elementary, it would make sense to try to do something along those lines. But even our local youth opportunities like Marshalltown Football League and Y Basketball can be a problem for kids. Even if we can help them with the financial part, oftentimes the transportation part can be a barrier. And I know I was talking to one of our parents that has students in the Marshalltown Football League, and, so I was inquiring because back in the day, it was flag football. There wasn't a huge financial investment they had to make. Now it's, full pads, tackle football, and I said, so what is the situation there in terms of practice and games? And this parent was saying to me that we usually have 2 practices a week and then a game on the weekend, and there's no guarantee that where those practices are held are within walking distance for the kids. And if that's the case, that's going to be a huge barrier, even if we can offset the financial cost of getting in the program. So I totally agree with you that I think the more that we can provide some form of exposure at the earlier levels, and we started with Lenahan since that's, that immediately feeds into the extracurricular opportunities that are available at Miller. But looking at elementary would be the next step.
What's going on at Woodbury right now is pretty good with the Fit Kids program, and you're talking about maybe even a possibility for after-school activities in the near future, then that's something that can be, like a sport can be added to that as we do for in the summer. We bring tennis or we bring golf or anything else. During the summer, I think that's something that can be brought as well for an after-school activity.
Well, I think this is, it's really enlightening, because a person could foolishly just do math and say, $15 an hour at Swift, take that times full-time, you're making $30,000 a year. What's the problem? They're above the poverty line, right? If you foolishly just looked at the math, but when you read what his definition of poverty is about being poor, it's more than just the financial side. And you talked a lot about, everybody's talked about the poor, that they, poor not from a poverty, from a dollar perspective, but what they're missing in life, or the support structure that they have in life. And I think it's all intertwined. And hearing when you talk about a child who'll never get to ride a horse, it's sad. Because if they set their expectation, well, if I can't do this, I'll never graduate high school, or I'll never go to college, or I'll never whatever. And I think it's, if you make the mistake of just looking at it from a financial perspective, you're truly missing the whole picture, I think. And I've only read 2 chapters.
I think too that people sometimes can get caught up on those really, destitute stories about homeless and et cetera, but there's, a good population of working poor too, and families that are maybe going through divorce and are trying to figure out how to live on separate incomes, or, someone just lost their job and that was the primary wage earner in the home. So I think too that it's important for all district staff to keep their eyes open for signs that kids are going through trauma, or to have established relationships with parents so that parents can feel comfortable enough to share, whatever they're willing to share, but that might be impacting their child's attendance and or participation in school, because I think we, stereotypically you can come up with kind of a definition or a look in an image in your mind of what someone living in poverty would look like, and I think there's people who live in high debt that probably fool you. They're in poverty, but it's a different kind of poverty. So I think it's just, with all the talk you hear about the shrinking middle class and, people not being able to get out of from underneath their bills, that we have to think about that in our community too, especially with second generation immigrants and others that are moving here.
There's a couple of things here. The information in the first 2 chapters is very much oriented around the science of chronic stress and trauma from that lens. And the interesting thing that Dr. Blodgett taught us was within each demographic, there's a bell curve of the impact that chronic stress and trauma has. There are people, as Lisa was saying, who live in poverty but do not suffer the impact of poverty the same as others. The one thing about chronic stress and trauma is it transcends all demographics in this bell curve. The bell curves may line up different places, but the impact of chronic stress and trauma is the constant between poverty, between all the different factors that we work with each day. And so these chapters do a really nice job of addressing chronic stress and trauma. And you ask about policies and things. First thing we really need to do is get on board, because if you use PBIS, the triangle, Tier 1 is understanding it. And I really appreciate the board studying this book, and especially chapters 1 and 2. if you read it once, read it 2 or 3 more times. Because I have experienced in 22 years in Marshalltown that it's not all about poverty. Poverty is an accelerant on the issue. But we work constantly daily with many kids who have that compounded stress, those adverse childhood experiences, and helping our own staff and our board and our administration to learn about the impact this has had. We wonder why we run quality programs in our district and we don't always have the same outcome from it. Well, we're missing part of the equation in some cases because there's more variables there that we hadn't considered. And so, tier 1, we need people to understand the information like it's in chapters 1 and 2. And it's not that you develop a sympathy, you develop an empathy and an understanding, because the understanding leads toward things you do every day, those little tweaks. I teach my kids a hug and a hi. You cross your fingers and you wave them. That act alone sends feelings of warmth, of safety, of caring. And I'll be walking down the hallway and I get hug and highs. And some of those kids are the kids that absolutely need the hug and the hi the most, and yet they don't have to go beyond their expectations to do that. And so there are just all kinds of things we can be doing to help kids attain that feeling of safety, that feeling of somebody cares about me, relationship. And you heard Erin use a term called grace. You know, the element of grace that our adults need to have for our children can be extraordinary, it can be exhausting, but we have to have it. Our kids will not progress unless we are building those relationships and attending to that part of their lives too. Because once the brain is flipped, no more learning occurs until it comes back. And in some kids it takes hours for the brain to come back. And there was a section in here about the cortisol levels and people taking oral cortisol. Well, cortisol comes from video games, cortisol comes from living in fear, cortisol comes from a lot of different sources in our environment. Kids who get used to living with cortisol, that's the next chemical that comes out is adrenaline. And we wonder why kids respond with huge responses over the smallest things. Well, they're living with high levels of cortisol, and at that moment it's just a quick trip right into adrenaline. And all of us know how it feels to have adrenaline. We've all experienced adrenaline. The problem is when you get used to having it all the time and you seek it all the time. So some of the issues our board receives from time after time, things that are really high-level behaviors and those types of things. Keep that in mind, because once you learn to seek it, it becomes addictive.
We're not into chapter 2 yet.
Oh, sorry.
That was chapter 2. That's why I said.
Let's save that for tomorrow.
Yeah. We will be moving into chapter 2 for our next meeting. I would encourage you, as Dr. Jurgensen did, to read it more than once because there is a tremendous amount of information in chapter 2. And you will be shocked with the things that happen with the cortisol levels in a child's developing brain, I'm sure. So chapter 2 for next time. Thank you all for your comments and participation.
Thanks for inviting us to be part of the conversation.
Thanks for your, yeah.
Mr. Kretzinger.
Hello, everyone. It's that time of year where we need to seek board approval for the application to the School Budget Review Committee in the amount of $3,044.88 for the special ed administrative costs associated with the Grandwood Consortium program that we are a part of. Just a little background or reminder for those of you who've heard of you before. The Grandwood Consortium, the Grandwood program serves kids in the Woodward area who have significant intellectual disabilities beyond what we can serve here within our neighborhood schools. And so we're a part of that. We utilize that for one student currently, and it is a student need that this is the best way to serve them, both with how to meet their educational needs as well as, if you look at the finances, the best way to meet the needs there as well. So to share with the other consortium members, the cost of the administrator to oversee the program comes in about $3,044.88.
Questions for Mr. Kretzinger? May I have a motion to approve the application to the School Budget Review Committee as presented?
So moved.
Fletcher Hernandez? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
And on to board. I think the first couple might be yours, Janelle.
Yep, the first one is former 502.5R, the student dress code, number changed to 502.1R. And I think everything else, other than the cross-reference change on the very bottom, is the only final change to that one. I would move to accept as written.
Second?
Second.
Carter Heitman, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0.
Next one, new number again, from 502.6 to 604.11. There's just some language change in the first subsection under the guidelines. I would move to accept as written.
Second.
And waive the second reading.
Yeah, and waive the second reading, sorry.
Carter Fletcher, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0.
And then the last one, once again, number change from 502.7 to 503.4R1. There are just a few modifications in some of the language there. I thought everything looked good. I would move to accept and waive the second reading.
Second.
Carter Heitman, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. Oh, sorry, opposed. Motion carries 7-0.
503.4 was a new policy, the IASB policy in conjunction with our regulation. Would recommend the board approve that. We'll strike the S off of good conduct rules. So it just says good conduct rule. Other than that, recommend we approve that as is.
So moved.
Second.
Miller Hernandez, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0, and of course, that was to waive the second reading.
It was.
Thank you.
401.10-R is a revision. And with some changes that we made, talking about that administratively. And I would recommend that we approve that, the board approve that.
So moved.
Second.
Carter Harris, all in favor and waive the second reading.
Yes.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0.
401.7 was a newly crafted policy by combining our old 401.7 and also 401.11 concerning employee travel and compensation. And puts language in there relative, since the IRS rate changes every at least 6 months, I think. We chose to put that language in there versus put a number that's going to have to be changed every time. It's outdated. We also increased slightly the reimbursement expenses for meals related with overnight trips.
So a motion would be to approve 401.7 as presented and delete 401.7 and 401.11.
Correct. So moved. Second.
Heitman, Harris, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries 7-0. Over to you, Karina. Your first time on the policy run. We'll help you.
Okay, so 502.12. Just change the number, it's the same as ISB.
502.7, we can just do that. So we'll mark that as reviewed.
And then 503.1, change to 504.1, and then add second paragraph.
Yeah, the paragraph that we've inserted is from the IASB policy.
That will need to come back for a second reading. Or a first reading, as the case may be, at the next meeting. And 505 is yours.
So,
504.5.
okay.
The old would be dropped. The new, you have is it now 502.9?
Yeah, and we made an amendment to that policy as well. This was one where we had previously approved it, but then we found that we had another policy that was related to it. So we've integrated from that former policy into the current one that we were looking at, which is 502.9. And then we want to delete 505.5.
Could I have a motion? Oh, no. It needs to come back.
And then 501.13, and which is students of legal age, which is really just legal definition, and 502.5 on student lockers. Those were policies that IASB has that we did not, so we're recommending that we adopt those and get those in our board policy book.
So those will come back at the next meeting as well. Yay! Wasn't that fun?
It's good. I like this little chart.
It was reasonably quick, so that was
This
good.
is really nice.
Critically important to keep all this straight.
Yes.
Vicki is doing a remarkable job.
That is really nice. It just really helps.
Well,
For the record-
we developed it, but we just hadn't,
Yeah.
we had just
Used
used it administratively.
Pardon me?
For the record, Karina feels slighted that she only had 2 policies to review, so she
How about
would.
if the next time she gets 22?
Could share with Ben.
I'm willing to split mine for next meeting. It's, we can
Because you're so
Ben has a
selfless.
list.
split them in half.
Such a good guy.
Any communications of note, Mr. Potter?
I'd like to concur that Vicki McVeigh is doing remarkable policies and working with me with being on the website. And, also, we'll be working on February 24th, preschool and kindergarten registration coming up here soon. So you'll be
Y'all have a good time.
You'll be seeing more about that. So, yeah, so Marshalltown Mall from 10 to 1, and you'll be seeing a lot more next week.
That'll be part of that. That'll be part of the fair again.
Healthy Family Fair.
Yeah.
Might.
Do you have anything you'd like to update us on legislation?
Well, I had 3 separate opportunities to meet with our area legislators this past week. The MEA Forum, which B was at that as well a week ago Saturday. We had a visit to the Capitol Tuesday night through Wednesday for the area superintendents and executive directors, and then we had a meeting at Iowa Valley Community College District to talk more specifically about dual credit and dual enrollment. I was encouraged, as you've probably read in the paper, with the prospects of possibly getting a 1% increase, given, we were budgeting for 0 and anticipating that. I was a little bit surprised that in addition to that, they're looking at trying to throw some money towards transportation equity, just because of it being a tight budget year. I'm not sure why they're not just devoting that to the overall increases, because that will have an inequitable impact, which is the whole reason for it, to try to bring equity to transportation. I think I alluded in the news and notes that the transportation equity issue is not as big an issue for us, although we'd gain ultimately when it gets resolved, but not nearly to the degree of a lot of other districts. The per student cost issue is a much bigger equity issue for us. There's much more to gain when they decide to tackle getting everyone to the same level of district per pupil cost. We get more than the state average, but significantly less per student than some other districts in our area. And that's all a product of where districts were grandfathered way back in the 70s when the foundation formula was created. So, it's generated by local property taxes, but we're kind of, I guess you'd say, maybe in the middle or close to the middle of what districts receive versus at the top or the bottom.
We're actually towards the top when you look at the total number of districts.
Yeah, I looked at, I've got that data. I'm just talking about in our area. I think we're only higher than one other district in our area, and there are 2 or 3 districts that are bringing in more dollars per student in our general area. But, and then the purpose of our meeting Friday was to talk about how, as great as Senior Year Plus and the opportunity for students to gain college credit has been, there's really been no increases in the amount of aid that's provided in order to offset those costs. So obviously we don't charge our parents, and so more of the cost has fallen on us and or the community college. The community colleges ate a lot of the additional expenses, and they're getting to a point, as you've read in the papers, where they've been cut a number of years, or had even smaller increases sometimes than us. That they're kind of getting pinched a little bit there too. So I thought our area legislators, as well as some from Benton County who had come to that meeting, they were surprised. They weren't aware of this issue of the supplemental aid for dual enrollment not keeping pace with the increased costs of college. I don't anticipate anything's going to happen this year, certainly, or maybe even next, but at least, we put it on the radar for them to consider. And I do fully believe they all see the value in high school students being able to access college classes and have those paid for before they leave high school. So hopefully something will happen in that arena as well. I also felt that, you know, there still is potential that SAVE would at least be seriously considered to be renewed for another 20 years at a minimum, if not have the cap removed. But I think there's still, as we heard when the legislators came to our meeting in late November, early December, that there's still debate going on as to whether districts should have to jump through additional hoops in order to access those dollars or spend those dollars. And it still comes down to, you know, whether districts and communities should be given local control within the law on how that's spent, or whether they want to tighten the restrictions a little bit with, as it relates to extracurricular or athletic facilities. So we also met with MEA, had an internal communications meeting on January 19th, and we talked about the calendar a little bit and gave them an update. We talked about the preschool proposal, gave them an update. Anthony has worked with them to develop a more efficient way of people requesting approval for their master's degrees or their advanced degrees that they're pursuing. We dispelled some rumors related to our current approach to curriculum and literacy versus using a basal. We talked a little bit, or reminded that we're looking to have a second IBB session as well for both the board, administrators, and MEA to be
February 26th.
to be referred for, to get that as new learning.
So if you have not responded to that invite, would you please do so? Okay. Looking at the reminders, this Thursday, we have a board meeting for the purpose of expulsion of 2 students from 5 to 7 in this room.
Yes.
Our next board meeting is the 19th, and Anson Elementary will be presenting its school presentation at the time. Ben, you're on for the next 2+. Looking at committee reports, we just heard about internal communications. Janelle, did you go to labor management for paras?
Yeah, actually, Anthony and I were at the labor management for paras meeting on 1:30. We spent most of the session talking about job descriptions, and they had done a lot of research. And
Pleasantly surprised.
yeah, I think they were really helping Anthony out. Handbook to.
Yeah, what I had asked them to do at our first meeting that we held back in December was go to colleagues in your buildings and have them collect the 5 or 10 most important aspects or essential functions of their job and bring it back to me as one piece. So they brought back a lot of info.
They did.
We'll be using that to inform what is put into their job descriptions.
Yeah. So that was the first part of the meeting, and then the second part of the meeting was, we talked about professional development, any kind of training for paras. They were able to talk about what they got, what they didn't get, what they would like to have, some of those things. So it was all good. It was a very good meeting. So.
Anthony, you want to give us a report on B&G labor management?
Yep, I had that one a couple of weeks ago. And we were missing some key players, so discussion was a little bit inhibited, but there were 4 topics that I noted that we discussed. We discussed the dress code and just making sure that it is being enforced equally across the district. There were some questions about the process for approving purchase orders. We discussed custodial staffing levels at Rogers for their night. And
just how and where, what is most efficient in terms of having where our rovers start their shift and where they clock in, and whether they need to drive the district to different locations, et cetera, et cetera.
Did I miss any committees that met?
I missed,
A couple weeks ago.
Was it?
It was after.
It was after the last meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
was that the Lao, or the,
It was the 18th.
okay, because I missed that one too.
That was-
Yeah, you were there. You'll back me up. I'll mention it to you. So that group met, lots of folks. I didn't realize it was such a big group, but I guess every school and central office, et cetera, was represented. Split into groups based on building kind of grade level and just looked at the data from the last year, or really the last handful of years. Talked about trends, talked about action plans. Maybe the biggest topic of conversation probably with the group I was with was the fact that the requirements for testing out of the ELL program is changing from the ELPA test and Iowa assessments to just the ELPA test. So what impact will that have? Will more students be testing out of the program? Is that the right word for it? And what supports may or may not be there for those students if they're now testing out. Additional conversation was around the fact that, there was the change in how the test was being administered. The ELPA test was being administered instead of, I guess, maybe manually or one-on-one, but now over a computer with speakers and microphones. How the students had to get used to that, but maybe they are getting used to that now. I guess maybe the biggest thing that stood out in the data for a lot of people was a lot of kids testing out at the younger grade levels and that slowing down to almost zero at the higher grade levels. Though, of course, then there's fewer students, I suppose, in the program at those grade levels. But I think we've seen that data before at the board meeting.
That was a great summary. That's what we spent our time talking about, strategies on how, I think they're convening another smaller group to focus on the 7th through 12th grade, because we do have such a high number of students still being served that are not exiting. So to kind of go back to the drawing board and think about who those kids are and what we can do to help.
What have we done this evening to improve education for students in the Marshalltown School District?
Our journey to learn the poverty book, I think, is a great initiative.
It's huge.
Me.
What?
You brought the
Oh,
idea of.
yeah. It came from one of my breakout sessions at IAS.
It was very good, and it was nice how the Rogers presentation sort of, applied it, so it's good. Yeah.
Anything else?
Can I add something on future agenda topics that's kind of tied to this? I'd like to request to talk about two things on a future agenda. One, I've gotten some feedback from parents about the change in the early dismissal policy at the high school that will be coming up. And I know that Jackie, when she was here, sort of briefly mentioned that at a previous meeting, but I'm wondering if we could have Jackie come back, put it on the agenda so people can come, we can kind of hear her rationale and let people ask questions about that particular policy change, because I'm getting feedback on it. And the other one is if we could have an update on the Roundhouse Phase 2 at a full board meeting. I'm getting some feedback on that, and mostly it's around, we have two big tax-supported buildings going up in Marshalltown, both with December 2018 completion dates, one police fire station and one roundhouse. And when you drive by one, there's a steel frame up, and when you drive by the other, there's nothing up. And so if we could get a full update on where they are, if they're going to meet the date, if they're behind, that kind of thing, I think that'd go well. Is that possible, to have both of those on an agenda?
Well, I can speak to the second one. It certainly is. And of course, we have those facility meetings that you're invited to come to get updates every couple weeks. But it is on schedule, but we can have Gary and/or Kevin come and give a firsthand update, or someone from Bush on that.
Okay, good.
And it would be good for the public to be able to hear that as well.
Absolutely.
How about the other one? Is that?
Yeah, we'll talk to Jackie and see where things are at.
Okay.
Back to anything else to improve the educational system besides poverty? Mm-hmm. Got some more kids going outside of the district for learning, which is always a good thing.
How far down can we go with that? Are there some kids in the elementary schools, if they have capacity on this bus? I know it's different putting elementary kids on a tour like this, because you're gonna need chaperones. but
Right.
if,
I think for the maturity level of the places that they're going, in a large group.
that's something to consider.
Middle school, maybe?
Yeah, maybe Miller.
Miller.
Yeah,
I
Miller.
don't know why Miller. Be a good question for Mr. Niehaus.
Do you want to do that?
Sure.
My quote for this evening goes along with early childhood and poverty and all of the things that we've talked about tonight. It comes from Kirsten Gillibrand, who is a representative and now a senator from New York State. She states, "If we expect our children to thrive at our colleges and universities and succeed in our economy once they graduate, first we must make quality, affordable, early childhood education accessible to all." Any other business to come before the board? We will move into exempt session.
Can we take a break?
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Is that a Fletcher Carter?
Yeah.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, the same. We are adjourned.